Hi friends, 7th through 8th grade, welcome. We're going to begin with our sniglet. This is faux citement. A-U-X is pronounced O. It's a French word that means F-A-U-X is a French word that means fake, faux, pretend. And then you can see the second part of the word is a part of the word excitement. So you have fake excitement, faux citement, mashed into one word, and it means the faking of happiness about something you really don't want to do. I think some of you might do this on occasion, if I had to guess. Then our Shakespeare quotation is one I'm pretty certain you've heard before. It's Greek to me. And we use that now to mean it's become an idiom, which we haven't really talked about idioms. We talk about that with the 5th and 6th grade. But an idiom is an expression that we say that says one thing, but it means another. And in our context, we use this phrase to mean, I don't understand it. But in its original context, if you look at the play that Shakespeare wrote, this is a history play about Julius Caesar. And if you know from your history, Julius Caesar was one of the rulers in Greece, and he was murdered. But in the scene that this quotation is used from, so Shakespeare often took historical events and settings, and he would tell it like a story and write it into a play. So he would take liberties to take a historical account and make it enjoyable to his audience. Anyway, in this particular scene, there are a couple of people standing in the audience, and someone up front is speaking in Greek. And the one person looks to the other and says, "What is he saying?" And he says, "I don't know. It's Greek to me. I don't understand Greek." And so, because Julius Caesar, at the time, there was a language change between, or actually, I don't know if it was Greece. It might have been Rome. Anyway, the Greeks preceded the Romans, and I'm getting fuzzy on all my details. I need to go back and read it. But you get the idea, is that now it has become a phrase that means I don't get it. So it's a fun one to use. It's Greek to me. And then our Proverbs of the day is Proverbs 25:15. Says, "By long forbearance, a ruler is persuaded." Forbearance is another word for patience. "And a gentle tongue breaks a bone." This is really interesting because it's implying that tone, how you say something, is as important as what you say. And that patience and gentleness can go a long way in how you say something. So that's something to keep in mind. We talk about tone in our writing classes as well. All right, so today we're going to just get down into some more nitty-gritties with this literary paper. So the good news for you is you're not creating anything super new this week. So you're not, you might think that you don't have a ton of work, which is good. But I want you to take what you already have and get it right now. Pause the video if you have to. Go get your paper. Put it in front of you. I also want you to have a blank piece of paper to have notes out, because what I'm telling you today, once again, is something that you can take all the way through college and grad school and beyond. If you go to get a advanced degree, you're going to be writing these kinds of papers. Maybe not literary, but these things still apply. And so it's really important that you pay attention today. So what I want you to do is I want you to take what we're talking about and apply it to your paper. So you're going to do another revision this week, and you're going to turn it into your parents. And each week, really, I'm not sure how many weeks we're going to take on this. I typically like to take several weeks for research papers and literary papers, because there are so many special elements to these papers. But if you learn them now, they will be with you forever. I'm not going to give you shortcuts. I'm going to tell you the right way to do it. Okay, so if you need to pause the video to go grab those things, you need a hard copy of your paper, you need a pencil, maybe even a colored pencil, and you need something to take notes with. Okay, so first off, when we write literary papers, oh, I just lost where I was. Where'd that go? we use what's called a style guide. Now, in the writing world, you might say, even of this class, like, why are there so many rules? Who decides these rules? And are they different for different people? Well, I'm going to tell you where these rules come from, who decides them. And yes, there are different rules for different kinds of writing. I did not fully grasp this really until I got to college, because the curriculum I used these rules, but they condensed them and made them into their own books and their own curriculum. And a lot of junior high and high school curriculum does this, but their ultimate resource is what I'm going to tell you about. Where do they get the rules? So the ultimate resource is what's called the MLA Style Guide. MLA stands for Modern Language Association. You don't need to know that. What you do need to know, though, is that this is kind of like the Bible of rules for writing research papers. And the way we're applying it today is a literary research paper. A literary paper is a kind of research paper. So I'm going to show you really quickly what this book looks like. Every few years, they'll come out with a new edition. So it's important. If I were you, I'd go ahead and get a copy. I'd have a copy and I'd take it with me. I'd get really comfortable in this copy, because what you're doing is a lot like what you do as a Christian, really, is if you have a question or you have something in life that you need to find the answer to, you go to your Bible. Well, in writing papers, okay, there is a prescribed way to write everything. Everything is detailed. What size paper, what size font, how to align your font and your margins and all of that. And if a parent's listening, I would also say this is a great time to introduce some basic computer skills, some Microsoft Office Suite skills, because they really go hand in hand with what they're learning. This is a great opportunity. We've done this with our kids as well. So I actually have beside me my copy of the MLA Style manual, because you can, at times, if you have a question, Google that. But MLA has an official book. This is an agreed upon book. Right now, it looks like they're up to the 9th edition. So whenever scholars, if you go to college, they're going to expect you to have the most recent edition. And so you have this book, and if you start now getting comfortable with it, like for instance, you might have a question about, do I use a comma here or not? There's a section on punctuation and commas. There's sections on if you even go and publish your manuscript, your research. There's information on how to notate things about ownership, permissions. There's sections on spelling and word division, plurals, all those things that you're learning now in your grammar classes. They're all in here, all those rules. And so, even for someone like me, who I do this quite a bit, I edit or I grade papers, I'm teaching this stuff, I still don't know all the rules. But what I've become is I've become a professional looker-upper. So if you can learn to become a professional looker-upper, you will get better and better at writing these papers. So my first important point is to use the MLA Style Guide. You could probably check it out at your library. You can become an online member, which, you probably don't need to do because this isn't something you're currently doing professionally. But that's our first point, is to use the MLA Style Guide. So, all of the rules that I refer to in this class coincide with this. So this is your academic writing Bible, if I can use that term. It means that this is the source of all of the rules. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about today is how to use quotations in your literary paper or in any academic paper. If you're writing a science article for a journal, or you're doing some sort of research in your field, it is expected that you use quotations. Why do we use quotations? We use quotations as if we're offering our audience proof. This is proof that what we're saying is true. It's evidence. And so you need to get really good at showcasing this evidence. But the important thing to remember is that these quotations must be accurate. If you intentionally or unintentionally misquote a source, a book, a phrase, you are plagiarizing. And plagiarism is a fancy word for lying or stealing someone else's words or misrepresenting them. It could be, at its worst, conceived as being deceitful, dishonest. Now, certainly there are some people that do this intentionally. You might even see this in current culture and politics and in the news, where they will take a splice of something someone said and they'll take it out of context and make it sound much worse than it actually is, where they take a quotation and they twist it, or they take a partial quotation. But in the same sense, it could be done innocently. You could unintentionally drop a word or misspell something or not capitalize something. And while those things may seem insignificant, they can have a significant impact. For instance, consider if I dropped the word not. She is not going to run again for office. What if I drop the word not in my quotation? She is going to run again for office. That's a significant change. So even the smallest mistakes can change what you're saying. And so quotations have to be treated with incredible care. And the MLA Style Guide and every other style guide, there's a couple others, which I didn't talk about because we don't use in academic writing. But they all agree that quotations, you do not have the liberty to change anything. Even, in fact, if you find a mistake in a quotation, there's a way to acknowledge that it's a mistake without changing it. So this is important. If a word is capitalized, you capitalize it. If a word is spelled a certain way, every comma, every period, every single letter must be preserved in your quotation. So, but that doesn't mean that you have to include the entire quotation, the entire paragraph, the entire story in your research. You can take small little bits, even just single words, as quotations to prove your point. So the last important thing I want you to know about your literary paper is that good practice is to use 2 or more quotations per point, per outline point, per paragraph, really, to showcase or prove the point that you're making. So what I did is I actually took a page from the MLA Style Guide, and I have it here for you. This is actually from the MLA Style Guide. This is the 2nd edition. The Manual and Guide to Scholarly Publishing. And this is page, well, it's 3.92 at the top, and I cut off my page at the bottom, but I want to give accurate credit. So whenever you quote something, you need to make sure that you give proper credit to who it is due. So the page is page 103. So I want to just demonstrate for you by showing you these different scenarios of using quotations. So prose is a fancy way of saying non-poetry. So I'm just going to read through this and point it. So follow along with me. I hope I'm going to probably make it a little bigger for the video. Okay, so let's read the first example. If a prose quotation runs no more than 4 lines and requires no special emphasis, put it in quotation marks and incorporate it into the text. So here is one way to do it. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, wrote Charles Dickens about the 18th century. Notice the quotation marks start at the beginning of the quote. They end at the end of the quote, but there is a comma that is inserted before the quotation, and the phrase continues. Charles Dickens wrote this about the 18th century. Okay? Then, the next example. You need not always reproduce complete sentences. Sometimes you may want to quote just a word or a phrase as part of your sentence. So this is another good example. They took the same quotation and they spliced it up a bit. For Charles Dickens, the 18th century was both the best of times and the worst of times. Now notice, I've seen some sloppy quotations before where a student might leave out that quotation mark and that one and make it as if it were one quotation, the best of times and the worst of times. That would be inaccurate because that is not, if you look up at the top, that is not how his quotation ran. There was no and there. So this is a very good rendition of how to splice up a quotation and use it in your own words. You're allowed to insert and as long as it's outside the quotation marks. Let's look at the next example. You may put a quotation at the beginning, middle, or end of your sentence for the sake of variety or better style, or for the sake of variety or better style, divide it by your own words, which is the example above. But let's look at these two examples. I'm going to turn off my highlighter so that I don't highlight more while I move my page. Oh, look at that. My highlights came with it. Well, that's not what I want. Okay, see if I can remove those real quick. All right. Next, we have these two examples. Joseph Conrad writes of the company manager in Heart of Darkness, comma, he was obeyed, comma, yet he inspired neither love nor fear nor even respect. Now, I'm going to take a second to show you a couple of things we've already talked about. I want to just highlight. So notice the present tense verb. This is what we call the literary present. We write in the present tense when we're doing a literary paper. Also notice that the title of the book was underlined, which you can also use italics. That is acceptable, either one of those. And so you get the author at the beginning, you get the work, and then you get the quotation. So they're including, that they're being very thorough in sourcing their quote. The next example takes the same portion and breaks it up. He was obeyed, comma, writes Joseph Conrad of the company manager in Heart of Darkness, yet he inspired neither love nor fear nor even respect. So once again, the quotation is accurate, but he broke it up for sake of interest. So see, this would be your quotation. Notice the quotation marks at the beginning and the end of this, and at the beginning and the end of this. Also notice that the end punctuation is always inside the quotation marks. So the period is inside there. The period is inside there. These may seem like small details. They are incredibly important. It shows your thoroughness as a writer to follow these rules. And these are the rules we all follow. Okay? Let's look at the next example now. If a quotation ending a sentence requires parenthetical reference, which we have not talked about yet, place the sentence period after the reference. All right, so as you get more into research, you will be required to tell us exactly where this quotation falls. So in this case, which you don't see, is that at the end of the paper, there would be a list of books and sources that the student used for these quotations. So the student then, in the sentence, would cite who quoted it. So, let's undo that. That's hard to see, right? The author, and then the source, and it looks just like this. You would have a quotation mark to show the end of the quote. Then you would have a parentheses, a page number, and a closed parentheses, and then a period. And once again, that's tedious, and it's very specific, but it must be accurate. This is because if I'm following along with your research and I want to go check your quotation, I can open the book that you told me to, the Dickens book, to page 35, and I would find this quotation. Or in the other example that we looked at, he was obeyed, writes Joseph Conrad. There's the author. And where's the page number? Right there at the end. Same format. You have your quotation mark, your open parentheses, 87, close parentheses, period. All right, so that's where we're going to stop. So here is what I want you to do with the work that you have been working on. So if you've been working on your literary paper, I want you to, first of all, make sure that when you use quotation marks, you followed the MLA guide. If you don't have your own MLA guide, you don't have to have it to write this paper or to finish it, but I do recommend adding it to your library. It will serve you well because the more familiar, the better you get at looking things up now, the easier it will be when you get into high school and college and you continue writing these kinds of papers. Then make sure that your quotations are accurate. So take your quotations and compare them to the original. They must be correct. And then last, make sure you have 2 or more quotations per point to showcase or prove your point. Okay, so for your homework, make sure that you have at least 2 quotations per point in your literary paper that you've been working on. If you do not, add them. You can do it in any of the ways that you just saw. You can have portions or whole sentences. Secondly, check each of your quotations with the original. Make sure they're accurate. Plagiarism, even if unintentional, is still plagiarism. And third, make sure you notate either in the text or in parentheses exactly where the quotation is found. So in the case of your papers, most of you did a biblical text, then I would reference that text either in the sentence itself. For instance, in Genesis chapter 40, verse 2, Joseph, blah, 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 and then you have your quotation. Or if you are just referencing it, then it would be at the very end of your quotation in parentheses, and I would put book, chapter, and verse. Genesis 3:27. You would also want to note somewhere in your paper what version you're using, because that's very important in a literary paper for the Bible, because different versions use different words. And so you want to note what version you're using. This is a project, because this is ongoing for parents, if you're grading this, I would give them 5 points per quotation. And so 2 per point. So if they have 3 main points, they should have 6 quotations. If they have sub points, they should have 2 quotations per point. And so I would have a total expected points, and then wherever they are lacking quotations, I would take away the points there. So, or take away points if the quotation isn't accurate or it doesn't follow the correct notation. So in other words, if you are looking at a paper and they should have 6 quotations, then that would be 5 points. So it would be a possible of 30 points. And then I would dock from there. So whatever out of 30. So let's say they forget to notate one of them, I would take a point or 2 off. If I find an error in the quotation, it's not a correct quotation, I would take a couple points off. Or if they miss a quote entirely, they only have 1 quotation per point, I would dock the whole 5 points. And that's how I would tabulate this assignment. So if you are thorough and you are accurate, you will do very well with this. And each week we're improving on this literary paper. And it may seem like we are taking a long time, but this is very similar to the process of writing a paper. Your content and your research takes a lot of time and work, but so does the polishing and rewriting and revising. So each week your paper is becoming more and more polished. And I hope this is a paper you can come back to and enjoy reading down the road. So I hope you have a great week. I will see you next week.